The First Great Awakening was a religious revival in the American colonies during the 1730s and 1740s. This religious movement brought a culture of individualism, questioning of authority, and religious pluralism within the American colonies. Such shifts in American ideology, caused by the First Great Awakening, acted as a catalyst for the American Revolution, as it helped solidify a sense of American identity separate of the British Empire. Religious fervor once held by American colonists began to run dry in the early 1700s. This deflated dedication to Christianity occurred for three main reasons. First, religion became increasingly impersonal and formalistic. Church services were taught in a stiff, formalistic manner, with many of the younger Puritan generation within religious communities lacking any zeal for conversion. Second, the intellectual European movement known as the Enlightenment soon found its popularity within the American colonies during the late 17th and early 18th centuries. As stated by History.com, Enlightenment thinkers emphasized a scientific and logical view of the world, downplaying religion. Many Enlightenment ideas, like John Locke's ideology of tabula rasa, or that humans are born as a blank slate that we fill in through our life experiences, became incredibly influential throughout colonial society. And third, an increase in wealth within the American colonies brought a disillusionment to religion. The transatlantic trade between Britain and the colonies during the late 1600s and early 1700s increased the standards of living for many North American colonists. Increasing and publicly displaying one's wealth became a prominent aspiration in colonial culture. Along with the diminishing popularity of religion throughout New England, the colonies were also religiously divided among different denominations, including Quakers, Anglicans, Baptists, and Presbyterians. From this religious dryness and divide, ministers began to adapt their sermons to emphasize personal conversion and conviction, along with principles of Calvinism. There are two famously prominent figures of the First Great Awakening that we'll discuss. First was Connecticut-born Jonathan Edwards. Edwards was the grandson of Solomon Stoddard, an influential minister for nearly 60 years. After attending Yale, Edwards left to work with his grandfather in his ministry in Northampton. According to the online textbook Yop, the first signs of religious revival in the American colonies appeared in Jonathan Edwards' congregation in Northampton. He soon became a wildly popular preaching powerhouse. His sermons were full of emotion and passion, in contrast to religious services prior to the First Great Awakening. Edwards focused on the holiness of God, depravity of man, and the necessity of personal salvation. His most famous sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, highlights such principles. Edwards preaches, "Therefore let everyone that is out of Christ now awake and fly from the wrath to come. Haste and escape for your lives, look not behind you, escape to the mountain, lest ye be consumed." Historical scholar Robert D. Russell states that while Jonathan Edwards had a great impact in reviving religious excitement in New England, his ministry was a small ripple in comparison with the great wave that was to follow in 1740 with the ministry of George Whitefield. George Whitefield was the most powerful voice in the First Great Awakening. Born in England, Whitefield converted to Christianity while attending Oxford after becoming good friends with Methodist revivalists John and Charles Wesley. Whitefield made 7 trips to America in total, preaching over 18,000 sermons to at times nearly 20,000 people. With his intense charisma and booming voice, he converted thousands during his 34-year ministry. Whitefield focused on heartfelt conversion and faith, living without sin, and inviting everyone to be born again. The results of the First Great Awakening altered colonial America religiously, secularly, and culturally. Several new Christian denominations were established, increasing religious diversity and religious tolerance in America. A greater celebration of individualism was also prevalent in the colonies. An emphasis on education came as a result of the First Great Awakening as well, as seen by the establishment of several universities like Princeton, Brown, and Rutgers during or directly after the religious movement. An individual example of the effects of educational importance within colonial America because of the First Great Awakening is Phillis Wheatley. Phillis was born in West Africa and sold into slavery to Boston as a child. Sold into then a progressive family, Phyllis's slave owners provided her with an education. They quickly noticed Phyllis's remarkable literary ability at a young age and continued to foster her education. By the age of 13, she began writing poetry. At the age of 14, she became the first African American to be a published author of poetry. The First Great Awakening came during a period of religious apathy and philosophical interest. Influenced by the principles of Calvinism, colonial division, and passionate ministers, the movement brought about a culture of individualism, questioning of authority, and religious pluralism within the American colonies. The First Great Awakening paved the way for American colonists to find a sense of personal identity and desire for independence from Britain.